Well, we've all probably seen that video by now, haven't we? Tweeted actually by rather more famous folk than the British sprinter Bianca Williams herself. We saw Linford Christie retweet accusing the police of being racist. This after the British sprinter Bianca Williams and her partner and their young baby were stopped by police in rather heavy-handed stop and search, no doubt. He ended up being handcuffed after he refused to get out of the car in front of their 3-month-old son. They were driving along, they say, in their own car in their local area in northwest London on Saturday afternoon when they were pulled over and stopped. Their argument was that we hadn't done anything wrong and that they were racially profiled. Well, Bianca Williams has released the video that she filmed of the stop and accused the police of racism. She's now called on the Metropolitan Police Chief, Cressida Dick, to resign over the racist police stop. Well, the police in return said they have looked at the evidence from the dash cam of the police car and indeed the body cameras of the police officers and say they had good reason to stop the car, that the car had been driving on the wrong side of the road, had speeded up when they tried to get it to stop, and they were simply acting perfectly reasonably, and no question whether it's going to be an investigation, but no question of it being a case of racism. Well, let's talk about this with Leroy Logan. He's former superintendent in the Metropolitan Police. He's also former chair of the Black Police Association Charitable Trust. Good morning to you, Leroy.
Good morning.
When I saw this video, my first thought was, well, the video doesn't start at the very beginning of the stop, so of course you're not quite sure what's going on. We've seen a little bit more extended videos now, and we've seen some, I think, CCTV footage on the TV news showing the police first deciding to follow the Bianca Williams and her partner's car. It seems to me, though, unless we can see the dash cam footage and the body cam footage and hear everything said, we won't know for sure what the motivation was for this stop. But from what you've seen so far, what's your judgment?
Well, my concern is the speed in which the Meta said everything was well, because they obviously have their own sort of body cam footage and their own sort of dash cam footage. That I don't know what clearly took place. So really, it should be down to the IOPC to say, listen, we have looked at this independently and there is no cause for concern, or there are some developmental needs for the officers, or whatever it may be. It's just the speed in which Cressida Dick and the rest of the Met have said, no, there's not a problem and everything like that. And that's what creates people's suspicion, to say how quick they come to this decision.
But I never understand why it takes months and months for people to come to this decision, because surely this is a case of show me the footage, show me every bit of footage you've got, not just what you say after the fact. What were you saying in the car at the time? And what were you saying to the when you were getting out of your car to arrest these? Well, they didn't end up being arrested, but to stop these people. That surely is. I mean, you could do that in half an hour, but surely we should also be questioning the fact that Bianca Williams and her husband, Ricardo dos Santos, who's a Portuguese sprinter, the fact that they jumped to conclusions assuming it was racist. There was no racist language used there, although it ended up being sort of fairly aggressive. It was not violent. He was being asked to get out of the car. He was refusing to get out of the car. He refused to stop. Again, the police version of events. They said they'd done nothing wrong. I can imagine, certainly, I would be, if the police were insisting I got out of the car and were angry at me, were pulling me out of the car, I'd get angry. But there have been conclusions jumped to on both sides, have there not?
Yeah, I think it's all about perceptions. I mean, from the public point of view, especially the black community, they have this very strong perception that's been passed on from generation to generation that they're over-policed and unprotected. And then there is perceptions from black officers which can result in racial profiling by them suggesting that black people are more of a risk. And some of that perception is fueled from even before they put foot on the ground of where they're going to be patrolling for the first time in their career. So it's those clash of perceptions. And then the other thing is this whole thing about they smelt weed or something like that nature. Now, to remember, they're two athletes. They get drug tested every week,
But also, it was a car driving past with windows up. How on earth could they smell weed even if there had been weed?
I hear an officer saying to me they smell weed and it's pouring down with rain, And so my concern is that it fuels these perceptions when it's the box standard behaviour. So for me, it's about a paradigm shift on how officers approach people who they think are at risk. In fact, there was an amazing stop down my own road on Sunday. I witnessed it, officers pursuing a cyclist, and it ended up in an arrest for drugs possession and with the intent to supply. So it's a certain amount of drugs, lots of cash involved, and he's a young boy on a bike. But the way in which they dealt with him, they even called an ambulance because he'd injured his arm, and then they put him in the van. Not a problem.
So it can be exemplary, but it can go wrong. But this is the difficulty, isn't it? Look, because I saw a lot of after the message that she'd posted online, Bianca Williams, and also Linford Christie. She's sort of one of his protégés, training wise. Lots of people are replying. If the police were telling me to stop, I would just stop and I wouldn't get aggressive. This, of course, this happens if you get aggressive. But the reality is, look, I'm a white middle class woman. The police have never pulled me over to stop. If I were to ever have a flash car, and they're driving a very flash-looking Mercedes, and the argument they were making was that, look, it's because it's a black man driving a flash car and he's got stopped numerous times, he says, since they bought that car a few years ago. I've never been stopped in any car I've driven. And the reality is that a lot of white people are saying, well, I wouldn't, I would just do what the police told me. But if this is something that happens to you week in, week out, and I've spoken to a number of particularly young black men, but even middle-aged black men, who say on a weekly basis they will be stopped by police again and again. I think your patience is going to wear thin, and your reaction may not on that one video perhaps be the behaviour that we would all like to think we would exhibit the moment we're stopped by police. But there is no doubt at all that things are being whipped up at the moment. But there is also no doubt that I've read a lot of reports into this, a lot of detail into this, that black people, even if you allow for the areas and the demographic and the socioeconomic issues and all of that black people are more likely to be stopped by the police than white people, regardless of all the other factors. You take all those out, they are. And that is something we are going to have to tackle, isn't it?
Absolutely, because, unfortunately, racial profiling has been an issue for decades. And as a result of that, people are being, their patience is wearing thin, for sure. And then the other thing is with certain stops, if you stop a car and there's a suspicion of drugs, even if they don't find it, they can put on the computer D for Delta means D for drugs. And as a result of that, they don't even need to, it comes straight up on the computer as soon as they do a vehicle check.
They'll be flagged up again.
Absolutely. And then they'll get stopped several times, even though and even if they passed on the car, it might still have that marker. And that's where it infuriates people, because there's no objectivity and it's not intelligence-led.
Yeah. That said, equally, I given that we've got the cameras, we can see the footage quite clearly of those two of the four police officers. And I think you can see a third as well on the camera. I have to say, I think calling people racists in the public without any actual specific evidence that we know that it was, or think that it was racist, again, I think that is also unacceptable. I think if both sides perhaps handled this a bit differently, things wouldn't have escalated quite so much. Leroy Logan, lovely to speak to you. Great to hear your perspective.